Pro Football Focus ranked all the offensive lines in the National Football League, and the Chicago Bears surprisingly ranked in the top 5 in all offensive lines in football. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Plus, which coach, other than Ben Johnson, is going to make a surprising impact on the Chicago Bears? Bears Wire talked about that. And we're going to continue looking at the list now of players at each position on the defensive side of the ball that are the players to watch in training camp. We're getting into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bears Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bears news and content.
What's going on, Bears fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bears Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bears related. I'm the host, Derek Hayes. More importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Chi Bears Central on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go and get into this content for today, y'all. So, Pro Football Focus has been going by position group by position group. We've been looking at their rankings for the Chicago Bears. The defensive line ranked in a pretty surprising spot. So wide receivers ranked in the top half of the league as well. But now we're at to the offensive lines, and this is where it's a big point for the Chicago Bears, right? And again, all this preseason talk is just preseason talk. It all matters when they're showing it on the football field. But out of all 32 offensive lines in the National Football League, the Chicago Bears not only ranked in the top 5, they were number 4 overall. Pro Football Focus going on to saying this: things are set to look a lot different in Chicago. Not only is the offensive line remolded, but it's also perhaps the most improved unit in the NFL. Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright, who both finished among the 22 highest graded offensive tackles in 2024, were already a promising young duo. Now the unit has 3 new interior starters who represent immediate upgrades. Trade acquisition Joe Thuney has been the best pass blocking guard in the NFL in recent years. Free agent center Drew Dalman ranked amongst the top 5 at his position in PFF overall grade in each of the past 2 seasons. The right guard, Jonah Jackson, if he can stay healthy and get back to his old form, this can be one of the top offensive lines in the NFL. That is great praise for the Chicago Bears. You know, one of the goals of every offseason is to be able to turn your weakness into, at bare minimum, not something that's not hurting you anymore. But if you can turn it into a strength, and much less one of the biggest strengths on your team, that kind of shows that you've had a pretty good offensive line. Now, offseason. Now, the Chicago Bears are going to have to prove it. One thing that I keep saying with this team, all the preseason stuff and all that type of stuff is good. It's good for conversation, but everything has to come down to what we see on the football field. And with the Chicago Bears, unfortunately, there have been times where we've won the offseason and we didn't win no games because of it, right? So, of course, that stigma is there, but you cannot doubt the work that the Chicago Bears have done on the offensive side of the ball. One of the reasons, for example, that I'm not as down on the running back room is because of the improvements that the Bears have made on the offensive line for the team this season. And so it's good to see that, as much, I always say this, which is much dumb articles and doubt and clickbait shit that's written about the Bears. It's always good when something positive is written about them, but again, take it with a grain of salt because everything has to be proven. Everything has to be shown. If it's not proven on the football field, it don't mean anything. But, one of the things, there's still questions around the offensive line. I have no doubts that the Bears could have one of the best offensive lines in football, but it's going to have to come down with health. Health is still a big thing there in depth. How do the depth pieces step up on this team? Because you can have really good starters, but especially for offensive linemen, they're not playing every single snap. Your starters aren't playing every single snap. You need to rotate guys out of there. And I think the Bears have a solid path to some decent depth, right? I think with as much as Pro Football Focus called out and talked about Braxton Jones, we don't know if he's going to start between him and Ozzie Trapillo. But even with that, if Ozzie Trapillo does not end up the starter, you now have a guy that you drafted high in the second round that can play either the left or right tackle. So that's good depth there, right? Kerenah Magaje, the Bears are hoping that he's going to take a step. Even the fact that he's played some reps with the starters as well and has, from what we've heard, looked pretty good when he played with the starters. The fact that he can play guard or tackle, I think, really works to that. You got a guy like Ryan Bates is still here, Bill Murray that's still there at the depth. Luke Newman, another draft selection of this year that I think the Bears are still looking over. And then one person that's not talked about a lot either is Theo Benedict. Now, keep in mind, this is a guy that the Bears thought so highly of that even despite having a season-ending injury, early into training camp, they kept him around. They wanted to take a look at him and see him, and he's only 23 years old. He's a guy that hasn't been talked about a lot, and I don't expect it, but he's another guy that could add some depth to that offensive line for the Chicago Bears. So the depth is one of the biggest questions here. I feel very confident in the starters that we have there. The question then becomes about the depth, and even at center, Doug Kramer, Luke Newman, right? Those are the two guys that are going to probably be competing for the backup center minutes on that offensive line, and that's where I do have some questions. But to look at what the top 5 offensive lines Pro Football Focus were, Philadelphia Eagles came in at number 1. No surprise there. They should. The Denver Broncos came in there at number 2. The Buffalo Bills at number 3. The Chicago Bears, of course, who we just talked about there at number 4. The Indianapolis Colts at number 5. The Buccaneers, the Minnesota Vikings, the Atlanta Falcons, the New York Jets, and the Los Angeles Chargers round out the top 10 there. If you want to know the bottom 5 teams as far as offensive lines per PFF, Houston Texans, Cincinnati Bengals, Seattle Seahawks, New England Patriots, and the New York Giants. Those were the bottom offensive lines in the game of football. Cleveland Browns are one spot above that one too. So, you know, it like I said, I feel very confident in what the starters are going to bring. The biggest question is the depth and how much that depth is going to be able to be relied on. Now, that's up to Dan Rouchar. We brought him in, again, a world-renowned offensive line coach. And so, you know, you got to trust that he's going to have the guys ready, that he's going to have the guys geared up and ready to go. And if he does, the Bears are going to be perfectly fine, right? If the depth guys show up and they're able to play their role well, this could be the best Bears offensive line that we've seen in quite a while, maybe in Steve-O's lifetime, because Steve-O's young. Shout out to Steve-O. I know he's going to watch and shoot me a text after he hears that shot. So, you know, and we'll see. But, you know, not to be pessimistic, but just to be real, you got to show it. It all doesn't mean anything unless you show it on the football field. And health is a big concern there as well, because when you talk about depth, you also got to talk about health. Jonah Jackson is a guy that was not healthy last season. You know, now he was relatively healthy. Other than that, he missed a lot of games last season. But, you know, I can't remember who called in a couple of weeks ago on a voicemail, and they were like, well, you know, Tevin Jenkins and Jonah Jackson basically played the same amount of games over the last few years. With Jonah, it's because of how much he missed last year. But, you know, and that's a question there. You don't want to deal with the health things. And so if this offensive line could stay relatively healthy and the depth can step up when needed, I think that we could be on to something to where the offensive line is no longer going to be a weakness and could even be one of the Bears' biggest strengths heading into the year. As well, you got to look at guys like Colston Loveland, Durham Smythe, and their ability to block as well. Roshan Johnson, Kyle Monangai when he's in there as far as pass blocking to help Caleb Williams out a little bit more as well. These are all things that are going to be important to keeping the quarterback fresh. 68 sacks last year. 68. You got to be better than the 68 sacks as a team. And while those all weren't on the offensive line, you like having a much improved offensive line hopefully goes away in helping build the confidence overall. So let me know what you guys think down below. As far as PFF grading the Chicago Bears, not only one of the best offensive lines, but top 5 in the NFL at number 4. Do you agree with this? Do you disagree with it? Like me, do you share a little bit of, okay, that's cool, that sounds good, but let's see it? Let me know what you guys think on that down below. With that said, yesterday we talked about an article from Bears Wire in which they they gave a player at each position group on offense as the player to watch at that position in training camp. Now, I had different thoughts than them on some of them, so we're going to go over their list. If I have any different players at that position group, I'll mention it. But today we're going to look at the defensive side of the ball. And to start off with, on the defensive end, they brought up Montez Sweat. Say this. Montez has a case to be considered the best all-around player on the Bears. They are hoping that a few players on offense challenge him for that rank in the coming year, but it's where they are right now. Sweat is also alone on the defensive line in terms of elite pass rusher. And that's the part where I'm going to stop at, right? Montez Sweat did not have the statistical season that people wanted to see from a guy that you paid that much money and that you traded for and all that. Now, you can factor in how much of the fact that the Bears didn't blitz, so we weren't creative. We actually got quite a lot of pressure for teams that did not blitz as much, seldomly as the Bears did last year. You had injuries all up and down that defensive line. Then we also found out that Montez Sweat was not healthy for almost the entirety of last year. So now with Dennis Allen, who's going to have a much more creative set of play calls, Montez Sweat coming into this, having a clean bill of health, which it looks like is really good, and overall better performance and depth overall on that. There's no question that you should expect more from Montez Sweat. And I actually agree with this ranking. Montez has to be a leader. He has to be a guy that comes in here and sets a tone, but also you have to come in here and perform. You just have to come in here and perform. He's one of those veterans that you have to look at and you got to say, you have to go out there and do your job. And you can't just do it and ski by. You got to actually come in here and dominate at what you need to do if the Bears are going to be good, if the Bears are going to have a good defensive line. Some of that comes in with Montez Sweat. Of course, Dayo has to do his thing, and I almost picked him here as the player to watch because if Dayo Odeyingbo does enough, if he has one of those repeated 5-sack, 8-sack seasons that he's had in prior seasons, and that keeps defenses honest and not be able to double-team Montez Sweat, that goes a long way. If Gervon Dexter, who we're going to talk about here in a second, if he has a more consistent year, it goes a long way in helping Montez Sweat. But I think play calling alone, being more aggressive on the blitz, being more creative with your play calling, and that's going to already help Montez Sweat have a better performance. But I'm not mad at Montez being the player at the defensive end position that needs to look out. You need to watch out for in training camp. Next up, defensive tackle. And they picked Gervon Dexter here. And I'm going to go ahead, bury the lead, no notes here. Gervon Dexter, who had a fire start to the season last year. And like I said, there's a difference between reasons and excuses. The defense sucked at times last year, 27th ranked defense in the league. The injuries all down that defensive line last year, that played a part into it. Lack of production out on the edges, that played a part into it. And it has to be synergy, right? The inside has to provide pressure to help the outside and vice versa. And Gervon Dexter, who his first year as a full-time starter, coming into the season last year, he's now coming into his second year as a full-time starter. We got to see more consistency from Gervon Dexter in year 3. Gervon has to be consistent from start to finish, and it doesn't have to be a huge sack number. For defensive tackles, it's not always about having some 6-7 sack total that indicates how much you can bring, but you have to be better at consistent pressure. You have to be better in the run game. Absolutely, Gervon has to be better in that run game, and we hope that that's going to be the case here as well, and we'll see what happens. We shall see what happens when it comes down to that, but Gervon Dexter being the player to watch out for at that defensive tackle position, I think that that's more than fair, and Gervon has to step up and do even better and more consistent based off what he showed last year. All right, next up, at the linebacker position, surprisingly enough, they labeled Ruben Hippolyte here. Now, you could have gone Tremaine Edmonds, especially with how he's paid, how disappointing his again, in relative. He's had solid seasons, but not to what he gets paid here. He just hasn't. And in coverage, he has not been what we brought him in here to be in coverage. Ruben Hippolyte, though, as a young rookie who's coming in here and trying to earn a starting position, I look at this two ways for Ruben Hippolyte. Not only is, he's a player to watch out for, the speed that he has, how he can be used in blitz packages, but also this could be an audition for Ruben Hippolyte to actually be the middle linebacker. And Tremaine Edmonds, who is on the clock this season, if Tremaine does not bring it this season, do not be surprised if he's not back in the Bears uniform next year with the way that the Bears can save. And so now him and Power Echols, these are two guys that really have an opportunity to show and use this for what they can bring. But Ruben Hippolyte, as that third linebacker, what the potential that he has to bring there in coverage and with that speed coming there to try to get to quarterbacks into the backfield, that really is something that could really open up this. And, TJ Edwards is the one guy that he's going to be consistent. You bet if he's healthy, he's going to be consistent. So you need somebody else that can step up. If Ruben ends up showing himself to be a dog for this defense, man, that really does change some things for this Bears team. So Ruben Hippolyte, not mad at it all. Him and Noah Sewell competing for that starting third linebacker spot, even though you're going to see some D-backs lined up that and things like that. But I think that's a fair thing. But I'm still looking at Tremaine Edmonds as well. Tremaine got to bring it this year. If Tremaine Edmonds does not play more consistently this year, we know that he's not going to be back. But we need Tremaine to step the hell up and be better this year. And then the final position, cornerback. No, I'm sorry, not the final. We got one more after this. The cornerback position. They labeled Jalen Johnson here. Now, I think the thing that's interesting about this is that you can name any of the corners. You can make a case for Kyler Gordon as the highest paid nickel in the league. You can make a case for Tyreek Stevenson and how he needs to step up after a disappointing second half of the season and the dumbass mistakes that he made. Hell, you can make a case for Zay Frazier and how with his size and speed and how Dennis Allen is going to like to use him, you can use that. But Jalen Johnson, and the reason why I do agree with Jalen Johnson here is because Jalen himself has talked about for a few years now wanting to be able to do more things in man coverage. Dennis Allen has already said he's moving Jalen Johnson all over that field. And what that's going to do is that's going to put quarterbacks in a position where they have to think more. in prior years, with the way that Jalen Johnson was used, is he basically was used to shut down one side of the field. We saw it. Teams did not pass really to the side that Jalen Johnson was on, and even when they did, he held them to a really low QB rating. But when the way that moving him around changes things is that if you're lining up as a quarterback and you know the Bears just leave Jalen Johnson on one side of the field, you look at that, you're like, all right, bet we're not going to go to that side of the field. If you know that Jalen is going to roam and he's going to move around and they're going to get more creative and starting him off on one side and maybe having him go to a different side to guard or whatever else and actually following players around, now you have to look at that and you have to process and say, damn, all right, Jalen's on this guy. This was my read on this one. All right, let's go over it. Like it makes you think more. And Jalen has to perform in that. And Jalen's been calling for this. So now, what's the thing I always say? I like to be able to hold players to what they say about themselves. Jalen laid out his goals for this year. And I said before, even if he reaches a third of those goals, that's a Pro Bowl or all-pro season. So this is a big year for Jalen, and I think that is. And not only in the production on the field, but because he is a leader. He is a veteran on this team. He may be the best overall defensive player that we have on this team. He's a leader. And so when you talk about guys like Zay Frazier that's coming in, right? When you talk about guys like just overall in leadership on that defense, that's what you need from Jalen Johnson this season. And so I think Jalen and having him picked here as a player to watch at the cornerback position, it's fair. But if you wanted to go Kyler, not mad at that because of the way that Dennis Allen is going to use Kyler very creatively. If you wanted to go Tyreek Stevenson because of the way that his season finished and wanted to say, let's look to see how he grows from those mistakes last season. That's all fair there too. So I think that, but Jalen Johnson being here, the pick, that's really good. All right, let's get into the last position, and that's safety. And Bears Wire here picked Jaquan Brisker, and I fully agree with this one. Jaquan Brisker is a player that we know what he can bring. He was on pace for his third straight year of over 100 tackles, and as a safety, that's really good numbers. And we know what Jaquan brings as far as he's tried to step up as a leader himself. Still only 26 years old. And this is a guy that, when he's healthy, he eliminates so many questions for you. The problem is his health. And so I think that, like, even just picking him for just that, can he stay healthy this season? And with the contract situation going on with him not having an extension as it stands right now, it makes it even bigger reasons to pick him. Jaquan has to have a big season this year. And when you look from week 5 on to the end of the season, we just didn't have him. And so now if Jaquan can step up and stay healthy and do what we've seen him do when he is healthy, it provides so much dominant play at that position. It helps the safeties, helps the defensive backs. Him and Kevin Byard really looked like a safety duo that was going to work. And I think it also eliminates another future thing for you. So Jaquan Brisker being the player here to watch at the safety position, that just makes sense. There's just no other way to talk about that. It makes so much sense for what this team is going to do and what this team needs. So Jaquan Brisker being that player to watch in training camp at safety. Can he stay healthy? How does he perform? How does he respond? He already talked about having to retrain his body, but he's not going to change his play style, which I think is really good. So we'll see what happens with that one. But all right, now, last time before we go, Bears Wire had all their writers name the new coach that's going to have the biggest impact in 2025, not named Ben Johnson. And I think this is just an interesting thing to see how people are looking at it. Alyssa, I believe is how you pronounce her name, she picked Dennis Allen as a defensive coordinator. I think I said it many times, Dennis Allen is as creative as a defensive mind as Ben Johnson is as an offensive mind. I think what he's going to use for Kyler Gordon, Jalen Johnson, Montez Sweat, just the guys that we have overall, the defensive line schemes, is going to be really important to see what Dennis Allen brings for this defense. And so I'm not mad at that pick. Brendan over there at Bears Wire picked Antwaan Randle-El, the wide receivers coach and assistant head coach. I think when you look at our receiving core with DJ Moore, Roma Dunze, Luther Burton, Olamide Zacchaeus, right? When you look at that, even what's going on with Tyler Scott, whatever happens there, that's a nice pick. I think when you look at what he's done here, how he worked himself as well as a wide receiver and working with Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I think that's important too. So Randall now gets to come in here and work with a young crop of players and a veteran, and let's see what he can get out of those guys. Mike Pendleton picked Al Harris, the defensive backs coach. I think that's an extension of how we know that Dennis Allen wants to use the defensive backs on this team. So I think that's a fair one as well. But I think overall, like, this is just, like, it highlights the fact that it's not just Ben Johnson. The staff that Ben Johnson went out there and picked, nobody picked Eric Bieniemy, surprisingly enough, especially with the running back room being looked as a weaker room. I was surprised that nobody picked Eric Bieniemy, but Eric Bieniemy been getting in doubt his whole entire coaching career. It's not going to stop now. So, but I think when you look at this, the coaching staff that Ben Johnson built and that he went out there and intentionally got. It shows a lot of like just how he covered his own ass and how he covered himself with having people that can stick to the standard that he's trying to set as a head coach here with the Chicago Bears. But let me know down below, what is the coach, other than Ben Johnson, you are most excited to see the work that they do with their position group? Let me know that down below. That's my time for today. Make sure you guys are following us at Shy Bears Central. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, ChicagoBearsCentral@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-242-9336. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bears related, but that's thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, Chi-Town up, but Bear down. Love you guys. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.